I have created a biblical timeline of events of the book of Revelation. And so I hope to be able to get into it with you guys. I hope you guys find this interesting. Okay, and this hopefully will shed some light as to why I believe that Revelation has been partially fulfilled and why I believe that we're in a little season of Revelation, okay? Chapter 20 of Satan's deception. And this will bring to light events that happened leading, from about 30 AD to about 70 AD. And the events that basically transpired with the judgments of the ancient Roman Empire up until now. And so these are the key time frames that I'm looking at. So let's get into it. All right. So I start our timeline here at 63 AD at the Roman conquest and capture of Jerusalem under Pompey. At 30 AD, Christ confirms the universal covenant. Around that time, 30 AD, the universal covenant is confirmed by Christ at his baptism. And this is a universal covenant that is confirmed of the salvation between God and the people of many nations. Okay, this includes Jew and Gentile, right? So it's Christ, not any type of antichrist figure that causes the sacrifice and the oblation to cease from the time of his baptism onwards, as recorded in accounts such as Josephus, where from that year on, since 30 AD up until now, okay, the temple no longer receives the supernatural approval or blessing of God for the acceptance of the temple rituals until the time of its completion, until the time of its complete destruction, okay? So it's Christ, not any type of antichrist figure, that causes the sacrifice and the oblation to cease from the time of his baptism, okay, onwards, as recorded in accounts such as Josephus, where from that year on, since 30 AD, the temple no longer received the supernatural approval or blessing of God for the acceptance of the temple rituals, okay, until the time of its complete destruction, as we see in Daniel 9, verses 27. In 33 AD to 61 AD, we see the Jewish persecution of Christians. Okay, this is more localized persecution. And in 62 AD, John is exiled to the Isle of Patmos, and he writes the book of Revelation. Now he receives the vision, okay? He receives these visions. He receives this message, and he writes the book of Revelation, and he completes it at this time. I firmly believe that it was around this time when John would have finished this letter, and that this letter would have been very necessary for the Christians around the entire world to have received, to have been circulated, so that they are comforted and aware and prepared to deal with the coming persecution and all events that were going to happen to the Jews leading up to 70 AD, and the events that were going to transpire, that were going to bring down the ancient Roman Empire. And so 62 AD seems like a more plausible time frame, and that's, again, a topic for another video. Okay, so in 64 AD, we have the Roman persecution of Christians, which start to ramp up. And in Revelations 1-3, we see the commencement of fulfillment. This is where I think that the events start to basically take place. Revelations 1-3 starts, and prophecy is being fulfilled. Now, the first seal opens, and we get a vision of a white horse and rider, as symbolized, I believe, by the appointment of Vespasian as a general. I believe he's a general at this point in time. And Nero formally dispatches Vespasian after the revolt, or a revolt erupts in 66 AD. Like the people of Jerusalem and in Israel, they were already being taxed. And anyway, once, according to Josephus's word, the Jews, and that's honestly a fantastic read, and it very insightful. According to him, the revolt and the war between the Jews and the Romans really happens when the sacrifice of oblation ceases, courtesy of Eleazar ben Ananias. Okay, and the Roman military conquest begins of basically subduing Jerusalem. Okay, and I also provide scriptural references to everything. So I'm going to make this entire timeline available on my Google Drive. Second seal opens and we get a vision of the red horse. And this is where civil war breaks out between the Jewish factions, okay? The zealots versus the moderates, or those who wanted peace with Rome. And it's during this time that Jerusalem descends into bloodshed and the zealot coup and factional warfare happens, and this is men killing one another. We get that imagery in Revelation. Okay, so what is basically these visions and the seals opening, I believe, literally happen in heaven, in the spiritual realm, but are physically being manifested here on earth. It is around 67 AD that we get the gathering of the elect, or the rapture, that I think happened. Okay. Now in a prior video I said between 68 and 69 AD would have been the time of the rapture, but to be honest, new evidence that I came across recently leads me to believe that it was around 67 AD that we get this particular occurrence. Why? Because there were no coins minted in 67 AD that were found at the Qumran community, which I find fascinating. Okay. Now, I don't believe that that community would have fled into the surrounding regions and would have carried their monies with them, because I just don't. I have yet to hear an explanation as to why they would have left their Bible, their Old Testament Bible, in vessels all throughout the entire area. I don't understand why they would have left their entire history, the history of who they were, like in those vessels, right? And not carried them with them if they had intended to flee and become refugees in another part of Israel, or maybe have gone to Jordan or somewhere. I don't know why they would do that. And it's not just, the Old Testament scriptures. Like it's also the book of Jubilees. It's also like the book of Jasher, the book of Enoch. They're like their history. And they wouldn't have brought that with them. I think they would have. There are no accounts that I can come across that I have seen where any of the zealots ran them off their land, or no account certainly of the Jews having gone through and found them there. In 73 AD, Roman soldiers said that the Qumran community was deserted when the zealots were there, and at around 68 and 69 AD, which is when we see the coins there at that site. Okay. We don't see 67 AD coins minted there. So I don't understand what people are trying to say, that they would have left and gone and proclaimed the gospel. They were gone. That's the mystery of this community. And this community also had refugees that would have fled Jerusalem and Judea. That's a topic for another video. The third seal opens, right? And we get the black horse, which is symbolized by the severe famine that came upon the city. And the Roman encirclement disrupts supplies, and food scarcity, okay, is acute. This happens between 67 to 68 AD. The fourth horseman is known as the pale horse, and this horse is named Death, and Hell followed him. And Josephus describes mass death from famine, from disease, and from war. And there are catastrophic death tolls, starvation, disease, and violence. And this happens more acutely. This happens around 68 to 69 AD. And then we get the fifth seal. And with the fifth seal, John sees a vision of the martyr saints who were slain during the persecutions of the early church. In Revelation 6 to 11, they are told that they should rest yet for a little season until their fellow servants also and their brethren, that they should be killed as they should be fulfilled. All right. And in Revelation 6, with the sixth seal, with the sixth seal, there is a direct correlation to Jesus's own predictions of this time period from Matthew 24 verses 29, using eschatological language. This is also seen in Old Testament prophecy with known historical fulfillments of cosmic events to express real world events, to describe the civil war that led to the toppling down of all the traditional power structures that were in place over the Jewish nation, okay, governing the people. And this would have happened between 67 to 69 AD, okay? And like I said, Josephus also gives an account of this. So does Tacitus, okay? And you can read about that yourself. So these men, right, who, as far as we know, maybe Josephus became a Christian afterwards. I'm going to correct this name here. Sorry, y'all, because I still have to clean this up and prepare it for Google Drive, okay? But you can basically read about that yourself, all right? Then in 68 AD, we get Emperor Nero committing suicide. Now, just before we get to that point, I want to make a note here, to go back here to this section, that there is a voices that was heard. I believe this would have happened later on, and it's described. Interestingly enough, it's described in Revelations chapter 11. Okay, so I'm going to get back to this, let us depart hence, this voice that they heard, where they heard, let us depart hence. Okay, I will cover in the Trumpet Judgements. Okay, so in the seventh seal, between the sixth seal and the seventh seal, okay, between 68 and 69 AD, after Emperor Nero commits suicide, there is a year of four emperors, okay? And so then it isn't until Vespasian is basically promoted, he's appointed the emperor of the ancient Roman Empire, that he dispatches the prince of the people, Prince Titus, to resume the assault and eventual desolation of Jerusalem. So there was this lull. There was this lull and silence, right? Where nothing was basically done against the people. And it was during this time when basically there was a suspension of war for a very short period of time. And so the seven angels in heaven are given seven trumpets. In Revelation 7, John sees the next stage of the vision, with the four angels standing on the four corners of the earth, holding the four winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. Okay? And interestingly enough, it should be considered that Titus had exactly 4 legions at his disposal to prepare for the final siege of the city, supplemented by auxiliary forces that he had encamped around the outskirts of Jerusalem shortly before Passover of 70 AD. The passages of Revelation 7 verses 1 to 3 takes place on earth while Titus and his 4 legions were surveying the scene to decide a tactical strategy on how to make their way past the walls of the city. Okay? And it's interesting because when we get back to Revelation 7 verses 1 to 3, to continue, so he then sees another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. He being, I believe that is John. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was given. Right? To whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. Right? And that's a topic for another video, because the 144,000, yes, I do believe I know who they were too. Okay. And then, so, and we get this, and then we get this description. Okay. Now, so there were 4 angels that were holding the 4 winds of the earth. And then we get these 4 legions that were basically holding back, holding off their assault. And they were basically encamped around the outskirts of Jerusalem, 4 legions worth, 4 legions. So I don't know. I look at those things that happen in history and I'm like, yeah, I kind of think that the 7 still happened then. All right. And then we get the 7 trumpets, okay, that John sees. And again, I believe that these were spiritual things that happened as representative of things that were happening here on earth. Okay, so the first trumpet judgment. So we get hail and fire is the first trumpet judgment. And this is symbolic representations of Jerusalem being burned internally by zealots. Okay, so as we see here, there are internal fires that destroy food centers, the food storage houses, literal burnings of the city of Jerusalem. And the famine worsens immediately afterwards. And this happens from 66 to 68 AD, right? So, Josephus explicitly says in his works that they burned the granaries that were full of corn, and thus they did not only bring a famine upon themselves, but upon the whole cities also. The second trumpet sounds, and there is a burning mountain, which is a symbolic representation of the Roman army's naval destruction of maritime Jewish forces. Okay, so the Romans trap the Jewish ships. A violent storm smashes the fleet. Thousands drown. Bodies fill the sea, and the ships are destroyed. And this happens between 67 and 70 AD. Okay, that we get this kind of destruction. Josephus literally describes blood in the water, and the ships were destroyed, and the bodies were washing up on the shore. Okay, so when we see in prophetic language kingdoms, armies, empires, rulers, this is often, they're regularly called mountains, beasts, and fire. So let's keep that in mind. So third trumpet is the wormwood. So the water supplies are defiled, okay, and the famine worsens. And this happens between 67 and 68 AD. So just to kind of pull back here, because I didn't mention this, but I believe that the trumpet judgments are a recapitulation and intensification of the seal judgments of Revelations 8 to 11. All right, so this is just a recapitulation, but things are getting even more acute. This is more of an intensification of the seal judgments. Okay, so then after we get the wormwood and the poisoning of the water, because yes, the water supply would be defiled at that point, we get the fourth trumpet. And between 68 and 69 AD, there is fear and chaos in the city, and there are night attacks. All right, so the city descends into terror. Okay, there is psychological and spiritual darkness and confusion, and there are literal blackouts from the destruction and the smoke. Okay. And when you look at this timeline, I've kind of lined everything up accordingly with key events that happened with the seal judgments. And then we get to the fifth judgment, and we get the locusts. Okay, this is the first woe, and the terror caused by the Idumean invasion, which was torture and massacre. And this is what happened at that time. So I believe that the Idumean invasions were basically a physical representation of the spiritual locusts that John was seeing. Okay, so they swarm Jerusalem, and they are brutal. There is panic and there is torment, and they're like a locust-like invasion. Okay, they're literally like that. And then we get the 2 witnesses of Revelation, who I believe are represented by Ananias ben Ananias and Jesus ben Gamaliel. I think that they're resurrected and they ascend into heaven in Revelations chapter 11. I believe this to be the case, okay? And then now getting back to the come let us remove hence. So witnesses in Jerusalem recall hearing a great multitude of voices saying, come let us remove hence, as the heavenly angels who protected the temple left before the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. So I believe that it's at this time So now we're getting into the summer of 70 AD. That not only were these two men who were the Jewish priestly officials who were actively trying to stop and to stop the zealot revolt against Rome, they were slaughtered, and their bodies were not buried. They were not burying the bodies, and that was some of the abominations that were happening in the temple. They were slaying humans, like human life blood was being shed, and they were not burying the bodies. And so, yeah, I do believe that they were resurrected at this particular point in time. Yeah, I do believe that once they were killed at around this time, and history kind of like isn't really too sure about like when, how long they would have, how long they would have died or when they died. We're told that like after 3 days, then they are brought back to life. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that they were slaughtered around 66 AD at around that time. But that's a topic for another video. I can definitely get into that. But I do believe that it would have been at around this time that they would have been raptured. And yes, would that have meant that this was a separate time than say what I believe the time frame of the rapture happening around 67 AD? Yeah. I think it likely that it was happening from 67 AD, and that this was one particular event that would have happened around 70 AD, and then they would have gone to be with the Lord. So does that make it possibly two raptures that would have happened? Possibly it could have happened that way. All I know is that there's no coins at the Qumran community minted at 67 AD, which I find very, very fascinating, right? We get coins minted, up to 66 AD, and then we get this missing time frame, like no coins at all. And then we see coins appearing again at 68 and 69 AD. So look, yeah, I think it's possible that the rapture happened in 67 AD and then also happened with these two witnesses. I believe that they were resurrected and then they ascended. These two individuals. And I think that this was also done as a sign, by the way, because they glorified God at the sight of them, right? So, and then after that, in 70 AD, we get the sixth trumpet. I don't think I need to, let me just remove that. It's a duplication of this here. And then we get the sixth trumpet. And this is the second woe, right? The Roman armies basically come in. There was a massive earthquake. So like all of even nature was against the Jews at this time. Now the third woe is the seventh trumpet, and the fall of Jerusalem is complete. Okay. So, by August 70 AD, we get the burning of the temple and the end of the old covenantal system, and the judgment climaxes on apostate Jerusalem. Okay. So yeah, I think that all of this would have happened quite rapidly at around this time. And it only really took 5 months, exactly 5 months to the day of the Idumeans invasion with the locusts. And then I think the two witnesses would have been resurrected at that time. Then we get these massive earthquakes. We get all of these astrological signs, right? Because we are seeing gates opening and comet, right? Bright light over the temple and so on and so forth. So, this is really intense. And then there is silence after 70 AD. Okay, so the Israelites are those that are left and surviving, are either killed or they're sold into slavery. And as for the Christians at this point in time, There's nothing. There's absolute silence. And one might think that they were actually persecuted out of existence. Or it's a combination of both, that they were persecuted out of existence, but a lot of them, anyone that would have survived, would have gone into hiding when Nero started to persecute the church, the members of the body of Christ. Okay? So, yeah, those who would have been surviving probably wouldn't have been no more than maybe 10,000 in the entire Roman Empire. That's certainly possible. And those who were alive and remaining in underground, I believe, would have been raptured. Okay. I believe they would have been raptured. And it's really interesting that I say that it was around this time that could have happened. Because leading up to Nero's suicide, he claimed that he was seeing the ghosts of the people that he killed haunting him. So I find all that fascinating. I think it's true. I'm a believer of it. I totally believe it. Okay, now 81 AD. Emperor Domitian enforces emperor worship. Okay? So whenever we are seeing emperor worship, you know that the Christians are going to be persecuted. Okay? And it's not just Christians. I believe that there would have been Jews who would have been against it. But Christians would have definitely been against emperor worship. And then Pontifex Maximus Marcus Aurelius, he resumes a more general persecution of Christians. Okay? So I just put it out there and just say, look, I believe that Christian persecution would have happened again, especially if the ancient Roman Empire is forcing its citizens to have to worship another god. All right? So now we are getting into the Vial Judgements. All right? So I'm going to read this bottom portion as soon as I get to a certain point. But I call this Revelation 16 to 19, the fall of the ancient Roman Empire. Okay? And we get the Vial Judgements. So, no preterist, I don't believe that this happened. And all of these judgments were fulfilled by 70 AD. And I'm going to give you some reasons why. And there are some reasons that we'll have to wait for another video, because already this video is getting very long and I might have to break it up. So, the first vial. And there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon men which had the mark of the beast, and upon them which worshipped his image. And this happened around 165 AD, when the Antonine, I hope I'm saying that properly, Antonine plague struck the ancient Roman Empire, just 4 years after the general persecution of the church. So this was the mark of the beast system, right, that I propose was happening at this time under Marcus Aurelius. All right. And again, that's a topic for another video, but there wasn't like a literal stamp on the forehead or on your hand. But there were certain rituals that you were expected to perform, and like certain pledges and oaths. Like if you were a citizen of the ancient Roman Empire and you were engaging in emperor worship, there were certain things that you had to do in order to prove yourself, and you were given certain certificates if you made your tributes and paid, to basically pledge your allegiance to the emperor. And the Christians were persecuted and killed at this time. The second Vial Judgment, and I believe that this was a plague. This was the Vial Judgment. This was the judgment of God against the ancient Roman Empire for this idolatry, like for the righteous blood of God's messengers and God's saints having been shed and sacrificed because of these this wicked beast system. The second vial. So the second vial pours out upon the sea, and it becomes as the blood of a dead man, and every living soul died in the sea. Okay, and sea language is like spiritual, like it's basically when you see sea, that's like people, right? So a lot of people died of this plague at this time, and then the angel pours out his vial upon the rivers and the fountains of waters, and they become blood. So all throughout this time, not only is sea indicative of the peoples of many nations, right? The Gentiles. But literally, there was burning heat that was taking place. There was so much death. There were also skirmishes that were happening. There were some siege conditions. There was some wars that were happening, heading into the fourth and the fifth vials, right? And this was basically the judgment of God. And when you see burning heat, right? So that's what we see in the fourth vial. You look at Old Testament scripture, and burning heat is repeatedly used to describe covenantal curses, siege conditions, foreign oppression, disease, war, suffering, famine, and divine anger from God. So bear that in mind, because as we see what happens to the Roman Empire, this becomes clear. So the fifth vial opens, and the fifth angel pours out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and his kingdom was full of darkness. And they gnawed their tongues for pain and blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores, repented not for their deeds. Revelation 16 verses 9. I believe that the people of the ancient Roman Empire would have been in pain, writhing in pain with all that was happening and that was coming upon them. So I believe that their sores, their diseases, and all that was happening against them with the invading armies and the political unrest and all of it, and yet they would not repent for their wickedness. And that's what happens. That's what happens when a person, or when judgment comes upon. Some people repent and some people don't. They remain very stubborn, willed, and prideful. The sixth vial. So the sixth angel pours out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. And that's in Revelation 16 verses 12. So the depleted Roman legions were seriously impaired with regard to their capacity to repel the invading Germanic forces. Going into the 3rd century, the ancient Roman Empire began to suffer multiple serious crises, such as additional new plagues and several crushing military defeats at the hands of the rising Sassanid Empire, which entered into the territories of the empire through the eastern areas of the Euphrates River, as Revelation 16 verse 12 is envisioned. Okay, so that's why I'm thinking that these vile judgments were against the ancient Roman Empire, because of all the events that were happening during that time. So the 7th vial. Then the 7th angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, "It is done." So this is where I'm open to, until I find something else in history. I think this happened between 235 and 284 AD. Okay. There were voices and thunders and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, okay, that we get, such that was not seen since men were upon the earth. And you know what ends up happening when we see earthquakes, right? That imagery, that means that there was political upheaval. The great city was divided into 3 parts, and we get that in Revelation 16 verses 19. And so what ends up happening, the city itself is not divided at this point in time. I don't believe that that is what is being said here. I do believe, though, when I look in history, I do see that the ancient Roman Empire was divided into 3 parts. Okay, so, and this happened shortly after this plague, right? So it's divided into 3 parts, and cities fell during this time. There was upheaval. There was a lot of wars. There was Germanic forces coming in. There were sieges, right? And I believe that when they say the great city was divided, I believe that the great city actually represents the ancient Roman Empire. Is code for that, okay? Aurelian reunites the empire. So the empire is split into three, okay? In Revelation 16 verses 19, and you can look this up in history, if you want to. This happened at this point in time. Aurelian then reunites the empire, okay? And this happens between 270 and 275 AD. And Constantine inherits a united empire. So then in 302 to 337 AD, we get Constantine, who inherits a unified empire, okay? And I believe that he is the eighth beast, and it's of the seven, okay, that goeth into perdition, okay, as stated in Revelation 17 verses 11. And Constantine creates a Catholic version of Christianity. Constantine dies in 337 AD, and the Roman Empire is divided under his three sons. The office of false prophet diminishes in power. Thrones are cast down as the Ancient of Days sits. Daniel 7 verses 9. But the body of the beast of the ancient Rome, of the ancient Roman Empire, goes on. Okay? And there we go. So the office of the false beast prophet diminishes from beast status, right? And then I believe at that time, it's highly possible that Satan is bound for 1,000 years during this time, as according to Revelation 20 verses 2. So I believe that he's bound before the actual fall of the Roman Empire. I believe this is possible. I put a question mark there because I'm still trying to sort out the details of that, but I propose it. And in 476 AD, we get the sacking of Rome by the Visigoths in 410 AD. And by 476 AD, the city is finally taken. And we get that imagery of that in Revelations 17, verse 15 to 18 to 24. Please read that when you get the chance, because this is a pretty big it really does explain how the kings of the ancient Roman Empire saw and beheld the ancient city of Rome, and then how they turned on the ancient city of Rome. So it's really, really divine judgment, and totally God behind all of it. All right. And then we got 1,000 years, right? So, okay. So at 476 AD to 1476 AD, I think that this is the possible timing of the start of the Middle Ages, right? And the reign of Christ and the saints in the spiritual realm commences, okay, in Revelations 20 verses 4. Now, I think that these are probably two different events that would have happened close to the start of the Middle Ages, and at the very start of the Middle Ages. Okay, and again, I propose to you that this 1,000-year Middle Ages was actually a spiritual reign of Christ and the saints during the Middle Ages, during this time, and also, yes, in part, just would have been in this time frame. Okay, so in 538 AD, something interesting happens. After the fall of Rome in 476 AD, Justinian I emerged as ruler over the Eastern Roman Empire from 527 AD to 565 AD, and is commonly known as the last emperor of Rome. Okay, but exactly 1,260 years go by between 538 AD and 1798 AD, which is when the office of the papal authority is deposed by Napoleon in the 18th century. So I find that fascinating. Now, the reason why I say that Satan, I believe, was bound between 337 AD and 1337 AD, and then loosed at around this time, because between 1347 AD and 1351 AD, we do get the Black Plague. Does this mean that that was a counter move? Was the Black Plague a counter move because the Prince of Wales, who might have been possessed by Satan at this time, was basically out there campaigning and trying to unify and create another empire, right? I don't know. But we also get the Renaissance, which emerges after the Black Death. So maybe that was a counter move to the Black Death, right? Like there are these moves that Satan is making and God is making. Move, counter move, move, counter move. So Satan is loose from the pit. I think it possible he went and he possessed, like I think he would have been roaming around and would have possessed someone like the Prince of Wales, who one of those, I'm not sure if it's the Prince of Wales or which one specifically it is. One of those princes were out there like making war and, trying to form an empire of some sort. And we get a lot of things that start changing when the Renaissance also happens. There's a certain way that civilization saw the shape of the earth, and that changed dramatically during the Renaissance. And you can see all kinds of ways in which people regarded God and people regarded each other. In the art was very, I don't know what to say, satanic, very revealing, tasteless. I thought, you can just look at just judge for yourself when you see the art in the Middle Ages versus what we see in the Renaissance, and you be the judge. Okay. So, and then we get to 1476. So as a possible end, I believe it really was the end of the Middle Ages at about that time. And we get a lot of wars that are happening and empires sprouting up. But what's interesting about the Middle Ages is even though there is no peace on earth at this time, what we do see are a lot of castles. So we do see a lot of men and noblemen rising up, and they're building castles and they have their land. And a lot of people would have owned their land. They wouldn't have had to pay like certain taxes to the Roman Empire at this time, if the Roman Empire had basically broken up because of why? The Vial Judgements that were upon it. Right? And I want to get into Revelation 17 again and 18 to get into who the beasts were, like who the various kings were, and also who also were the various beasts or rulers at that time, who were basically promoting the beast system. Okay. Now, from 1476 to about 2026, we interestingly get about 560 years of being in the little season of Satan's deception. So, we'll see what happens, because the U.S. is parked right outside of Iran, and there could be World War III that could pop off, that could lead to what I believe will end up, at the battle of the Battle of Gog and the armies of Magog against the land of Israel. Okay. And then shortly after that, in Revelation, we get to the Great White Throne Judgment. And then after that, we get to the New Heavens and New Earth. So I'm going to make this available. I'm going to just mention what I have here below before I wrap up this rather long video. So I just wanted to make a mention that Marcus Aurelius, so around 161 AD, he is recorded to have resumed a more general persecution against Christians, which is what I have said, from about 161 AD to 180 AD. And then Decius, about 249 AD to 251 AD, and then Trebonianus, right, Gallus, from about 251 AD to 253 AD, and finally Augustus Diocletian, who reigned from 283 AD to 305 AD, who was what has gone down in history as who is known to what has gone down in history as the Diocletian persecution, or the persecution of Christians. This is the last general persecution to be in parts of the empire until Constantine, who reigned in 306 AD to 337 AD. Okay, so I just wanted to make mention of that. All right. Now, there is the Christian persecution of the saints, and that continues under the office of the papacy, or the then Roman Catholic Church. I think that Christians would have been persecuted at that time. It might have ended somewhat under Constantine, when Constantine basically made a Catholic version of Christianity. But anybody who was not about that would have been persecuted. So I don't know for sure, but it's just kind of my thinking that there would have been persecution when it continued. And then of course we have the religion of peace persecuting the saints and the Christians, right? And that continues to this very day, and I think will happen up until the Great White Throne Judgment. And then there is no more persecution forevermore. Okay, so I will clean up this video. I will clean up this timeline and offer it in the description below. Thanks very much. I do appreciate you staying as long as you have to watch this video. And I will clean up this timeline so that you have a copy of it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And I will see you in the next video. Take care.